I'm happy to take that,
Thank you.
Trustee Kellogg. California community colleges have a participatory governance structure. You have delegated certain authority to the superintendent president. You've delegated certain authority to the academic senate. We work collegially on develop planning processes and governance structures that include the various stakeholders of the college. The way we manifest that is through our planning committees. So the top of the food chain in planning is the College Planning Committee, which has representation from the Academic Senate, unions, and as vice presidents and the chairs of all of the other planning committees. We have planning committees such as the Budget Advisory Committee that focuses on the development of the tentative and adopted budget, monitors the budget, and provides feedback to the College Planning Committee on issues related to the budget. And so there is a constant feedback loop, at least that is something that we constantly strive for, to ensure that all of these constituent groups and participatory governance structures are talking to one another. So there is distance learning committee, or there's a committee looking at the infrastructure for information technology. That information is shared with College Planning Committee, and it's funneled through our college planning process so that those needs are reflected in our budget, and that's what's presented to you as a board. So that really takes most of the academic year planning. There's an entire cycle that we're required to do through our accreditation process. And so we constantly strive to provide as much information as possible through this structure and ensure that the budget that you receive reflects the planning process that you make us responsible for.
Thank you. My apologies to my colleagues if this is sort of just basic stuff, but I don't know what people may or may not understand it.
Vice President Gable, why did we increase the reserves for load banking and vacation liability reserves by $0.1 million?
At the adopted budget time, we've actually closed the books, and so when we do the tentative budget, that's an estimate of what those liabilities will be at June 30th. Now that we've done the adopted budget and we've closed our books, that is the actual amounts of the liability.
I see.
Okay, so moving into our FTES history and projection, we've pretty much covered this, where you see the last 3 years, which are the columns on the far right, 13-14, 14-15, and 15-16. We are projecting that we will not have any unfunded FTES. We did not have unfunded FTES in the previous 2 years, and we're not projecting to have any in the 15-16 year. So here is just a quick overview of all of the funds that the adopted budget covers. So as you can see, our adopted budget for 2015-16, the far right-hand column there, we are planning on spending $437 million. I won't cover the unrestricted general fund changes since we're going to be covering that in detail, but some of the larger changes I'll just bring to your attention. On the restricted general fund, you see there that we're budgeting $44.6 million. Last year we spent $24.3 million. And the increase in expenditures for 15-16 are related to several different grants. The largest new grant that we got is AMTEL, or Advanced Manufacturing Engineering Technologies for Linked Learning. We received about an $8 million grant in 15-16. We also received $1.6 million for a TACT grant. We do have the $1.3 million for instructional equipment that we mentioned, and we have some equity in SSSP as well as the SBDC. So those are the big changes in the adopted budget that we did not have in 14-15. On the capital projects fund, you see there that we're projecting to spend $13.6 million. The primary reason for that increase is we had $1.3 million for scheduled maintenance. We have also transferred $7.1 million from the one-time mandated cost funds over there, and we're continuing to spend down previous year's scheduled maintenance fund allocation. On the general obligation bond fund, you see a significant change there where we spent $47.1 million, but the budget is for $185.6. Just as a reminder for the board, we budget the entire amount that has not been issued yet. We don't plan on spending $185.6 million in 15-16, but that is what is left on our allocation from the Measure E 2008 general obligation bond. We will probably spend another $40 to $50 million when we end the year in 15-16. Some of the major projects that we'll be undertaking, just as a reminder, we will be completing and opening up Building GG at the PCC campus in the spring. We will also be opening up and completing Building C here on this campus. And then we will have buildings QQ and RR under construction at the PCC campus. And we're hoping late spring, maybe early summer, to start construction on both buildings J and P here at the LAC campus. So those are some of the big things that we will be undertaking in the current fiscal year. The other significant change from our unaudited actuals is on the Student Financial Aid Fund. You see that we spent $46.2 million in 14-15, and we're planning on to spend $53 million in 15-16. The reason for those increases is about a $5 million increase in Pell and about a $2.2 million increase in our Stafford direct loans that we provide to the students. Okay, so moving into the unrestricted general fund, here's the overall summary where you see that in 14-15, we ended the year with $111.2 million in revenues. We spent $106.8 million, so we had a surplus of $4.4 million, and our fund balance was $25.6 million. Our adopted budget for 15-16 that we're bringing forward to you today includes revenues of $129.2 million, or an increase of just under $18 million. On the expenditure side, we're bringing forward $130.8 million, an increase of $24 million over what we spent in 14-15. The 15-16 budget does have a deficit of about $1.7 million, which would bring our ending fund balance down to $23.9 million.
Vice President Gable,
Yes.
on the expenditures and other outgo, why was there an approximate $6 million increase in the expenditures? I understand, and I know some of my colleagues may view this as getting into the minutia, but it's simply our oversight role, and I'd like to understand why we have that increase versus what we projected in the tentative budget.
Well, you're asking why did the other outgo line item increase by $6 million?
Expenditures and other outgo.
Okay, I'll cover that in a minute, but just the answer is, as I mentioned, we moved $7.1 million in the one-time mandated cost funds to the capital outlay fund. So when you move money to another fund, that's shown as other outgo. And then the offsetting of that was $700,000 that we are not moving to the self-insurance fund that we moved in 14-15. So the net of those two items is about a $6.5 million increase to the other outgo. But you'll see that in a couple slides when I get to the expenditure detail. So going over the revenue summary and what makes up that $18 million increase, it's primarily in our apportionment and in our other state revenues. So you see for the federal revenues, that's just decreasing slightly by about $38,000. Our apportionment is increasing $7.5 million. Much of that is what we covered when we did the state budget, but it includes the $4.7 million for the base allocation increase. There's the $288,000 for the enhanced non-credit rate increase, $1.1 million for the COLA increase, $1.7 million for growth, and then 1.1 million for the full-time faculty obligation funding that we received, as well as about a $230,000 decrease for the decrease in the deficit factor. The other state revenues, that 10.6 million increase, is related to mandated costs. And so it's the net effect of what we received in 14-15 and what we're going to receive in 15-16. I mentioned that we had the one-time allocation of 11.3 million for 15-16. We had 865,000 in 14-15. So the net of those two is about the $10.6 million. And that was what I just covered on apportionment and then the other state revenues. Here is a breakdown of what our revenue looks like and the sources of funding that it comes from.
Vice President Gable, can you go back one slide, or was it 21 on the apportionments? I believe that's the one. So how is it that our fawn penalty increased when we actually hired more? Because I believe what we had in June was 0.95 million, and now it's 1.14 million. And I'm almost, I don't know, maybe I'm missing something, but we did hire folks, and it was 36 is reported here, 36 full-time faculty, and 27 was reported at the tentative budget.
Right, so what this bullet is referring to is the prior year apportionment funding, and so you can see the breakdown of that revenue is on page 18 of the adopted budget book. But basically what we're saying is that our prior year apportionment is reduced in our budget by $1.1 million. And 288,000 of that is the fact that we aren't projecting to have a fawn penalty in 15-16. So if you recall, in 14-15, we did have a penalty. We were 4 full-time faculty short in the fall of 14, so we had a penalty of 288,000. For fall of 15, although we haven't done the calculation yet, we are not projecting to have a fawn penalty. It's going to be close, but as of this point, we think that we will meet our full-time faculty obligation. The difference of $1.4 million that you see on page 18 of the budget book is related to the change in the deficit factor. So as I mentioned earlier, the deficit factor has changed at each time the Chancellor's Office gives us our apportionment funding. The deficit factor changed. The big cause of this was when they did the recalculation for our 13-14 fiscal year. The deficit factor decreased by about 1.3%, which equated to about $1.4 million for us. It went from 1.7% down to 0.45%. So that's what that bullet, that fourth bullet there, is referring to as the prior year apportionment.
Okay, so the deficit factor that we had in June, from June to now, it's changed and it's caused a more of an impact on our revenue. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Because within the 2-month span of the tentative to adopted, we've lost revenue from and essentially we're getting penalized, but we're striving and we're hiring more faculty. It just seems a little bit counterproductive. I mean, or I'm missing something, because I know we've hired more faculty.
Well, yes, we've hired more faculty. The faculty that we've hired goes into our fall of 15. So what this is showing is the difference between our unaudited actual, so 14-15, and our adopted budget. So in 14-15, we received an additional $1.1 million in revenue, and it's the net effect of the change or the decrease in the deficit factor, less the amount that we had to pay for our full-time faculty obligation penalty of $288,000. we have not built that $1.1 million into our 15-16 adopted budget because one, we're not going to have a fund penalty, and two, we don't know what the deficit factor for 14-15 is going to be yet until they do the recalculation.
So maybe the question would be on the full-time obligation that's required, what would we as a district possibly look at to possibly have those changes for the future to where we aren't penalized when we're making best faith efforts?
Well, and I think, you know, the reason that we had the penalty of 4 and fall of 14 was we had some failed recruitments, and unfortunately we did have at least one faculty member that passed away last August. So that was, you know, we were hoping that we wouldn't be penalized, but with those failed recruitments, that's where we came up 4 short. Now, for fall of 15, you may recall that at the tentative budget, we thought that we were going to hire 27 full-time faculty. We ended up hiring 36 full-time faculty. A couple reasons for that is we had some late retirements that we needed to backfill for, and we were trying to make sure that we weren't going to have another penalty in fall of 15. So that's why we're hoping that with the hiring of the 36 faculty that we will not have a penalty in fall of 15, but we won't know until October when we actually do the calculation.
So the simpler question then for me would be to turn to people and say, well, where does this fall on? If there was ever to be a change in this, where does it fall? Is it a legislative? Is it a regulatory? Is it a board of governors?
It's
Some directions. If they really feel this is unfair, how do we
Right.
address it?
It's both. It's, you know, education code spells out the full-time faculty obligation, and then there's also Title V regulations that guide us on the full-time faculty obligations. So it's twofold.
Isn't there some discretion?
No.
Not anywhere.
No.
The only discretion,
It's very specific on how you do the calculations.
the calculation is, there's no discretion there. The discretion lies within the Board of Governors whether or not they can waive the requirements in any given year. And at this point, I don't see any way that they can continue to waive it as they did during the recession. But this is an issue that has been debated quite a lot over the years because there is not equity across districts in terms of how this number was calculated, what the base year was, all sorts of issues that come into play. And we're hoping that at some point this issue is tackled within the Board of Governors or within the legislature. We're trying to influence the one Board of Governor member that's in the audience now to take this on herself, but
Yes.
yes, that's true.
Could we do that now?
So maybe something in the future, if this board would like to pursue. I think it would be very challenging. I would just say that up front, but again.
And as a reminder to everyone, the reason we're talking about a full-time faculty obligation penalty is because about 3 years ago, the Senate and the union came to this board and asked that we not hire faculty. And so we've been catching up ever since, and I think we're caught up now, but that is why we're talking about a penalty.
Okay, so the pie charts on our sources of funding. As you can see, 85% of our revenue comes from our state apportionment. And then we kind of further broke that down to show how much of that almost $110 million in state apportionment, where that comes from. So 62.6% is coming directly from the state as general apportionment. We have 15.5% coming from the EPA, the Proposition 30 funds, so that's the Education Protection Account money that is set to expire in both 2016 and 2018. 17.3% come from our local property taxes, and about 4.6% come from our enrollment fees.
Could you very briefly say why, when we get all these grant monies from various sources, it really doesn't affect this, but it's still good for us.
Right. The grant monies all have restrictions and guidelines of what we have to spend the funding on. And that goes into the restricted general fund. You can't spend it on things that you would typically spend out of the unrestricted general fund. That would be called supplanting. So any grant does not allow you to supplant any expenditure that you would typically make. And so, we really are dependent upon our FTES. And, I didn't mention, but the state principal apportionment is generated from the FTES that we earn and the students that we serve. And that's where the money is calculated based upon how many students that we serve in any given fiscal year.
Vice President Gable, did you mention that the state principal apportionment segment is further dissected in the pie chart next to it? Is it?
Yes.
Because I'm adding those numbers up and it doesn't equal 85.1%. It's like
It equals 100%.
100% of the 85.1% is.
Yes.
Oh, I gotcha. Okay,
Yes.
great. Thank you.
Okay, so moving on to the expenditure summary, and how are we spending $24 million more in 15-16 than we did in 15-16? So you see there on the academic salaries, we're projecting to spend about $3.8 million more, and that is primarily due to the 36 new faculty that we hired. It is also a result of the salary restructuring that we did for the full-time faculty in 14-15. Increased our step cost for full-time faculty, so that was about a 5% increase in 15-16 with that agreement that went into effect. On the classified salaries, those have increased by about $2.3 million. Again, that is for the 51 restored positions. It also includes the 1.02% increase that we provided to both the classified and the management staff, as well as step increases. On the benefit side, we kind of already covered that, and the $4.1 million increase is related to our health and welfare, PERS, STRS, and workers' comp increases. Supplies are going up about $292,000. Services are going up $4.3 million, and that's primarily related to the one-time mandated cost allocations.
Oh, okay.
And did that answer your question, Trustee
Yes.
Baxter? Okay. The capital outlay is increasing about $2.7 million, and again, that is one-time allocations from the mandated cost money. And then the other outgo is increasing $6.5 million. This was the question that Trustee Zia asked earlier, and that is primarily related to the mandated cost one-time allocations. And that was what I just covered. So here's the breakdown by dollar amount for the mandated cost allocations. Previously, we just saw the categories and how it met a board goal or institutional priority, but here's the dollar breakdown that totals the just under $11.3 million.
Vice President Gable, I think you skipped a slide. It was page 26. Can we talk, I'd like to understand these line items with the contract services and operating expenses. What I understand, you've outlined the main reasons why there's been an increase, and that adds up to about $2.74 million. What about the rest of it, the $1.65 million? What was that due to?
So the contracted services and operating expenses appear on page 21 of the adopted budget book, and it's several different line items that cover professional services, travel and conferences, utilities, election expenses, other services, as well as indirect costs. So what we highlighted here were the major changes to the budget and the reasons therefore. So
Yeah, I understand that, and thank you for further describing that, but I just want to understand why we're taking such a big leap in increasing these amounts in the professional services. It's just, earlier Superintendent Oakley was alluding to that the line items here, and it's valid, it's true, we have it. It's just hard to tell, why do we need, why the increase for this amount of contract? What is the professional services for? Why is the travel conferences increasing by 57%? Those are the questions that I have, and I'd like to have it answered at some point. If it's not possible tonight, it would be nice to get a further breakdown of what we're talking about in the budget book for at least for myself. I don't view it as getting into the minutia, viewing it as being able to fulfill my oversight capacity. So why do we have that increase in professional services? Why do we have the increase in travel and conferences of 57%? Is it higher need? Are we traveling more in order to get something for the district? If we can touch on that, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
And just to be clear, I don't think anybody has said that we think you're getting into the minutia. You ask your questions. We're happy to get the best answers that we can, but no, I haven't heard anybody say that.
If I can begin answering that, and I'll let Vice President Gable get into any detail that needs to be described. Much of this is one-time costs that the district is incurring. We have one-time money that we are trying to spend on a number of student success initiatives, to include increasing professional development, which is part of the line item that you see. We're doing the website redesign. We're working on the educational master plan. So these are costs that we are incurring this year, and ensuring that if there are one-time funds, that we allocate them based on the board's goals to try and achieve the goals that are set forth, knowing that these funds are not going to be available to us in future years. So this is typical for California budgets. When there is better budget times, there are a lot more one-time funds available to districts, and this gives us an opportunity to try and gain ground on those initiatives that the board has seen as part of their board goals. So that is why you see the increase. These are one-time increases, and we're going to make the best use of the funds based on our participatory governance processes and allocating the funds to the particular initiatives.
Right, and the other thing, if you look at the budget book on page 21, you'll see that our adopted budget for 14-15 had $9 million for contract services and operating expenses. And we're projecting in the adopted budget for 15-16 to be $11 million. So it's about a $2 million increase. What we tried to do here was list why that $2 million increase occurred, because our budget is a rollover budget, which means the budget that you had in 14-15 is the same as it will be in 15-16 unless we make augmentations. And so that's what we really tried to detail out, are the additional amounts that have changed since the adopted budget of 14-15.
Okay, thank you for explaining that. Let's go back. I still have a couple other questions on this slide. If you could help me understand. On the technology refresh, how come we're dipping into two different funds for that, for this scope of work? One is for the under the capital outlay, and one is on the other outgo.
So what is under the capital outlay is the amount of the refresh that we think that we will be able to undertake in the 15-16. What we've moved over to the capital outlay fund is funding to help us have the funding source in 16-17 and future years for technology refresh. And so we're kind of setting aside money specific to technology refresh for future years, knowing that we won't have, or anticipating that we won't have, one-time funds in 16-17 to help us cover those costs.
Okay. And I just want to say for the record, I think an increase of $2 million per contract services is significant, and it would be prudent that we curb that spending. That's all I have on that slide.
Okay, we covered this.
I'm confused. I want to understand your point, that it's too much money, or what, are you objecting to particular expenditures that they're indicating?
Yes, I think increasing it by $2 million, even though if it's one time, I don't understand why we're doing that. We're spending more money, the $2 million addition,
Are there
and it's just my personal point of view that I'm stating for the record, that I don't think it doesn't seem like it seems a lot. I'm sure there is a great explanation for it. I just I disagree with spending $2 million in addition to last year's.